All right. Good morning, SIGCSE friends. Come on. Good morning. There we go. There we go. My name is Mark Sheriff, and I serve as the secretary of the SIGCSE Board. And it is absolutely my honor and privilege to help lead us in a conversation with these two fine gentlemen. And I know Philip, unfortunately, who is another fine gentleman. We'll have him join us. This picture won't talk, don't worry. But I did send him a number of these questions that we are going to go through today, because many of you in here do know Paul and Richard and the work that they have done in our community over so many years, and the work that Philip has done as well. But there's a number of people here who are first timers, and we want to make sure we get to understand kind of their impact in our community. So while we're having this conversation over the next hour or so, be thinking of your own questions, because we want to make sure that this is a conversation for all of us. I'm just up here to, ask a question every once in a while. But towards the end, there's a microphone over here, house left, a microphone over here, house right. I'll make it very clear when we're getting to the Q&A section, and then line up and let's learn more about these guys. So first off, congratulations. Let me get in my own chair here. Oh, this is so nice. So much nicer than the chairs y'all are in. Sorry. Well, gentlemen, once again, should I just put Philip right here? There we go. Let's put Philip just right there. That's not creepy at all. All right. Let's get to know you guys a little bit better. So, Richard, your background in mathematics, into theoretical computer science, then led you into accessibility and accessible computing at UW. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Oh, sure. It started really when I was a kid. I was born into a family where my parents were deaf, and they were teachers also at the California School for the Deaf in Berkeley, where I was born. Mm-hmm. And so I was around the deaf community growing up. And, going to school, I was hearing, like my twin brother and my two sisters were all hearing. So we just went to public school and stuff like that. And there were some incidents, things that happened that we didn't really understand at the time, that, like teacher conferences, things like that were kind of awkward. Anyway, so I grew up.
How did those teacher conferences go? Was that your first,
Well, they were skipped because they weren't beneficial for my parents, because there was no sign language interpreters available at that time. They could send notes and talk to each other by passing notes back and forth and things like that, but it was, that's what I meant by awkward. Mm-hmm. And so, I kind of grew up that, but I gradually realized I became really good at math. And I was good at math, and I got good grades in math. And eventually I went to college and excelled in math there, was a math major. And then I went to UC Berkeley and got my PhD in math. Yoo-hoo for Berkeley.
There you go, yeah. I'm sure there's a few Berkeley folks out here.
Yeah, and, old timers will remember that the California School for the Deaf was in Berkeley. And it was there from the 1800s. Actually, it was opened before the university itself. The University of California was open there, so it was actually older. And in kind of a land grab, the university grabbed the School for the Deaf and took it over around 1970, and the School for the Deaf moved to Fremont, California. So that actually irked my parents quite a bit. And there was protests and stuff like that. But, the deaf community doesn't have a lot of power. Anyway, so when I finished my PhD, it was kind of in computing, a style of computing. It was before really complexity theory came about. But I learned about it, in my final year as a grad student. And I went to a talk by Steve Cook at Berkeley. And I didn't understand a word of it, actually, at the time, because the kind of computing I was doing was so different, more mathematical. And his was very mathematical, but more practical at the same time. And so I think I told Steve Cook this story at some point. He's a Turing Award winner from, I don't know, 20 years ago. So, um, so I decided to switch to computer science because I really liked computing. And of course, there weren't very many, it's not the computer age yet.
Right.
Um, so it was kind of risky, but they accepted me at the University of Washington, and I started there in 1971 as a faculty member. And then I just did teaching theory classes and just did what I did. And then somewhere maybe in the 1980s, mid 1980s, sort of this urge to do something related to deafness came up. And so, it got stronger and stronger. And eventually, by 2000 or 2005, I gave up computer science theory and did 100% accessibility. So there was this other drive that I had that drove me to, and that change really made my life better because you don't know people out here. Some people do theory out here. It's hard,
Yeah.
and trying to prove a theorem that you have over several years, and then have somebody else prove the same theorem. And oh my God, I worked on that for 2 years and somebody else got it, that kind of stuff. So I was really happy to move. And then I got closer to the deaf community in Seattle, deaf-blind community in Seattle, and deaf-blind people everywhere. I went back to Gallaudet University and taught there for 1 semester. That's where my parents met and went.
Oh, wow.
And Washington, D.C. is the College for the Deaf. So, and then as I learned more and more about disability, I moved beyond deaf and deaf-blind to all sorts of other disabilities. So, that's kind of my life story.
Wow, that is fascinating. Wow. And Paul, your history in our community, serving as symposium chair, as program chair, your work at the NSF as a program officer, how did your computing journey bring you here?
Well, I'm glad Richard went first because I didn't think about what I was going to say. So I'm sure
Few questions.
I was going to say I'm sure it's going to come back so funny, but I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up in Syracuse, New York, and my dad was an electrical engineer, and I think all my life I kind of envisioned following in his footsteps. And he was into, at the time, some of you may remember the Heathkits. He built his own. Well, he didn't really build his own, but he got a amplifier for a stereo system in parts, and he soldered it together.
Yeah.
And I kind of followed that. I built a clock and those sorts of things. And at the time, I was really interested in biology, and I wanted to become a veterinarian. That was kind of my plan. And I happened to see that famous Popular Electronics issue that had the Altair on it. And I saw that thing and I said, I want to buy one of these. So I went to my dad and I said, here's a kit. And I said, I can build a computer. I said, can I do this? And he looked at me and he said, no. And he said, what's going to happen is you're going to get this thing, you're going to build it, you're going to turn it on, it's not going to work, and then you're going to have me troubleshoot it. Well, I mean, I was a teenager at the time, and so I was like, well, screw him. I'm going to do it anyway. So it came, but true to form, I put it together. It didn't work.
Yeah.
And he ended up helping me troubleshoot it. But that was really I think what spurred my interest in computing, but I still wanted to be a veterinarian. And then I went to, I started my undergraduate career, and I don't know what it was, but it was in genetics class. I always remember it. I just thought, my God, I can't do this for many years. I thought I got to do this. I got to get a man. I got to go to vet school. I got to get out of school. I want to enter the real world. And I always find that ironic because I never left. But anyway, so I switched majors. I was trying to decide what to do. I thought, my dad's an engineer. There were no computer science programs at the time. And so I went and did physics, and that was a disaster.
Oh, no.
And then I went to switch, and ultimately I did stumble into computing. So that's how I got into computing. But I mean, as far as my career is concerned, really it was this community that really led me to everything that I did. As many of you know, I love beer, and I love sitting at the bar and having a couple of beers with people. In fact, I know I saw Sharon and I saw Jody and Val come in. We spent some time over beer last night. But most of the things that I decided to do came about because I was here at SIGCSE talking to friends, and we went from there. So I remember one SIGCSE, I had met Mike Schneider at a UFE workshop. I don't know if those who remember that, but I remember he was here and we were doing the usual. We were having beer together and we were complaining about CS2 books, I think it was. And we were, and I said, damn it, we can write a better one. And then he said, yes, we will. And sure enough, we did. And that was born over beer in a bar here at SIGCSE. Going to the NSF was kind of the same thing. I met a program officer here and they said, you'd probably be pretty good at this. And I thought about it and I went into it. So for me, this community really made a difference. And I also, the other one, I don't know if he's in the audience today, but the other one I always remember is Henry Walker. I went to, I think I heard him.
Yep.
I was probably 5 SIGCSEs in, and it was we were in Covington, Kentucky.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if Henry remembers this, and I thought, and here I am, I'm an assistant professor. I haven't done anything in SIGCSE, and I went up to Henry and I said, I want to run the conference. How do I become a program chair? And Henry, in Henry's way, I don't know what he was thinking in the back of his head, but he said to me, I think that's a good idea, but you should find someone who has a little bit more experience to pair with. And I did. I reached out, a good friend of mine, Jane Prey, and and again, that's how that all happened. It's all this community. So I mean, for the first timers that are out there, the one message I want to say is leverage this community. There's a tremendous amount of talent here. There's lots of connections, and like I said, in my experience, and I don't think it's uncommon, a lot of the decisions, the things that I did, the people that I reached out to, it all started at a SIGCSE somewhere.
No one is going to believe this. I did not know you were going to tell the story about writing the textbook, because when I joined the faculty at the University of Virginia in 2007, the very first class that I taught was written by, as I kept saying to my students, Paul Tymann. And it took a decade before I was corrected on that. But my academic big brother, Tom Horton, and I, this was the very first class that I taught as a professor. Would you sign it for me? There we go.
You had this plan, didn't you?
I had the textbook plan. I did have the textbook plan, but I didn't know you were going to tell the story. That's even better. So if anyone is super interested in polymorphism and abstraction in Java 1 point, I don't know, nothing, I got a book I can recommend here for you. So, all right. Well, as he's writing, oh God, it's writing a long one. Oh gosh, I'm terrified now. All right.
Put a big heart in there.
Put a big heart.
I was thinking of skull and crossbones.
Skull and crossbones. You both have been, as we just discussed, in this community for decades and have had such an impact. And the first question I wanted to talk to you about is when you think about then to today, what do you think is the thing that's most surprised you about how this field, CS education or just CS in general, has evolved, either for the better or for worse, like just over this time period?
You go first.
We'll let Paul go first.
Well, so to be truthful here, we had these questions ahead of time. So I've been thinking about this for a little bit.
No way, Paul.
Anyway, the first thing that I thought of when I thought about this question is I thought about how different computer science, probably computing in general, but computer science education in particular is different today from when I started school. And Richard and I actually talked a little bit about this yesterday, and I'm going to try not to take away any of his thunder, but I think a big inflection point that really changed computer science education. I think it changed the way that people thought about computing. And Amy actually touched on this in her life story in her talk yesterday, was when microcomputers came out in the late 70s, early 80s. And I kind of see that as the democratization of computing. I mean, before that, you know, you had to kind of go to the temples and, you know, go in and say the magic passwords to gain access to the computers. But when those microcomputers came out, all of a sudden everybody could get their hands on them. And, you know, and again, when I listened to Amy, my experience wasn't exactly the same, but I just told you I had that Altair 8080B, and I was fiddling around with that, learning about computing. And it amazes me today the kind of toys and things that students have at their disposal. And I kind of planned this ahead of time. I'm going to call people out, but my grandson is out there somewhere, and it, you know, he's never experienced a world without computers. And we were sitting at the table, you know, waiting to go out the door today, and he's looking at his phone, talking about the spam that he's getting. And I'm thinking to myself, when I started computing, none of that ever happened.
Yeah.
So that's one big thing, is the ubiquity of computing and networking. You know, again, to think about, I remember my very first computer that I saw was a NORAD computer. That was one of the big computer when we had in the height of the Cold War, it was controlling the missiles and all those other sorts of things. I walked into a room that was a computer. And now there's probably at least 1,000 computers in this room right this instant, each of which is probably more powerful than that. So that's one thing that I think is really different. And I think that's changed education in that we now have the ability to use those tools that we didn't have when I went to school. The other thing that I think has changed a bit that I think is important is kind of the nature of computer science. When I started, it was kind of like computer science was this isolated discipline. And I sort of felt like, you know, as a student, the institution gave the department the money, they made some computers, or they bought some computers. Typically they were in the basement, and then we'd go into the basement, we go do our thing, and as long as we did our thing, we were okay, and nobody else really paid much attention. But today it's very different. I've really, in my lifetime, seen computer science kind of go from I don't know if isolated discipline is the right word, but I mean, now we're really a service discipline. And I'm not 100% sure if we've, as an education community, have really absorbed is not the right word. I can't come up with the word that I want to say, but I do think we need to think about that. And I think that changes the nature of what we need to do. And that I don't want to say we need to evangelize, but we certainly need to educate people about computing and what it can do and how they can use it in their disciplines.
Yeah, well, my story goes back further than when I was in college. There, as far as I know, maybe there was a computer somewhere that did, you know, stuff on the business side of, you know, but nobody had a computer. In fact, when I did some undergraduate research with a faculty member there, brother went to a Catholic college, St. Mary's College of California, and Brother Alfred was kind of my mentor. And he was famous because he started the Fibonacci Society and the Fibonacci Journal, which still exists. And so I've actually been writing a paper about Fibonacci numbers right now. So I've gone back to theory, believe it or not. And I can still do it. By the way, I can still do it. So anyway, we had slide rules in the physics class. We didn't have a computer. There were no handheld calculators either when I was in college. This was I started in 1961 in college. And by 1965, maybe there were a few computers around, but we didn't use them. We used big, hairy calculators that had many, many keys on them. And when you did multiplication, it took a while. You know, but addition did very fast. So that was my introduction to computing, if you like. And then when I went to grad school at Berkeley, I got into the theoretical side of computing, talking about undecidability and decidability and things like that. And that really loved that. And I did my dissertation in that. In fact, this dissertation title, you might appreciate it, is called Mitotic Recursively Enumerable Sets. So I stole the word mitotic from biology for the title of my work. And there is a research paper that nobody reads with that title out there in some obscure journal. Anyway, so when I came to University of Washington, I think I'd written one program in Fortran.
Wow.
In Fortran. And I think I don't think, I might have been Fibonacci numbers calculating them, but you can't go very far, because they're so long. And then when I got to Washington, they hired me to do theory. And so I did theory. And that was really, thank God there were some books around. Hopcroft and Ullman wrote some books and some other people, Aho, Hopcroft and Ullman and so on. So there were some things that I could build on to do that. And of course, I went off and started doing my own work as well. In the theory area. So and then we did have a computer in the department, but just one. In fact, I tried to find it on the internet last night. It was a Sigma 5, which was.
It wasn't connected to the internet.
Yeah, it wasn't connected. There was no internet. Yeah. But anyway, and you had to use cards and all that stuff to program it. There was a CDC something for scientific computing. And I programmed that with cards. And so this is really going back. And so the transition from that to having, by 1975, there were time-sharing systems. And the first time-sharing system that was brought to campus was an HP system in the business school. And so I had my students go up there and program in BASIC at terminals. And that was the first time they didn't use cards. And this was 1975. And finally I got a computer on my desk because we got some Unix box to do that. And so it's kind of like I went from no computers or thinking about computing to actually using computers. And then, of course, then I joined your age about that time. And so it sort of follows the same story as his.
Yeah. Well, I asked this question of Philip as well, and to what has surprised him the most, and he hasn't been in the field as long as you two gentlemen have. So he was speaking more about the way we teach. So what surprised me most is just how little introductory CS programming curricula have actually changed since the time that he took APCS. Part of me feels that this is a great thing, since having a stable core of foundational material provides some intellectual stability amidst the rapid rate of change of industry, of software development trends across time periods. But another part of me feels like students today may see intro curricula as somewhat antiquated, kind of like seeing calculus textbooks from 100 years ago. And I think this is a good transition because you're both retired, and I know that the
same here.
Yeah. We're looking to the future, and you're passing it off. What are you thinking about as far as how things in the curricula could change, should change? Do you have any insights, or is it kind of a, boy, it's the Wild West for y'all now, good luck?
One thing I did not say, and this is related, is some things have not changed. In 1971, P equals NP was an open question. It still is an open question. So the theoretical side of computing has changed. They study different things, and they haven't put aside this fundamental question, but there's no progress, or very little progress. So I think that not everything has totally changed. Things have stayed the same. And so I think on the theoretical side, of course, they're looking at different things now. And, whatever happens in practice, like operating systems came up, time sharing, and then so people studied sort of theory of parallelism and stuff like that. So there is a sort of a driving force in technology toward theory and having theories like that. And I've done that myself. And I was very fortunate to be like the only theory person at the University of Washington. So I had to talk other stuff. And so I absorbed that in and thought about how that could be done theoretically. So that's kind of, the way I think about it.
Yeah. Paul?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting that Philip brought up the fact that CS1 for him stayed about the, he mentioned it stayed about the same. Again, thinking back to the different SIGCSEs that I've gone to, it seems to me that one common trend is that there's always a lot of talk about that introductory programming sequence. And, and I can remember, belly aching, why don't we do something different? Why don't we discuss things other than this? But I think I've come to realize that we don't quite have it yet. I think I think many of the models that we use right now for CS1, focusing maybe on programming first, is the way that we were taught. I mean, for both Richard and I, even though, we're about a decade apart, I think it sounds like, we still had the same experience that really computer science as a discipline, I don't think it had evolved enough that really programming is all there was.
Yeah.
And really that was the focus. And I think what happened is, as we graduated and we became teachers, when we were thinking about, well, what do we teach our students? We're going to teach them what we do now. And one of the things that Amy has made me think about yesterday is that we all come to where we are today different ways, every single one of us. All of our life experiences are unique. The way we were brought up, where we were brought up, the values, the experiences, and all those things. And we don't learn the same. We all learn differently. I like to read books and try to understand. I remember I was working with my son once. I was doing a consulting gig where I had to build a website, and I wasn't up to date on all the HTML, and I was having troubles. And he actually had a co-op, and he was doing that. And I said, "Hey, come over, help me with this." And what I realized, we worked very differently. And he very effectively used search when we had problems. He used search to identify what the problems were. Once he identified what the problem was, then he could go in, and he moved at a much faster rate than I did because I was really trying to understand the nuts and bolts. And it just made me realize that we think differently. And I think one of the things that we haven't really been good at, and I'm unfortunately going into some of my other questions here, but I think what we need to start thinking about is how do we make the courses that we teach, and how do we make computing, and sitting next to Richard here, I've been trying to come up with a different word, but I haven't been able to come up with it, more accessible. And what I mean by that is not necessarily accessibility in the context that Richard's talking about, although that's an important part of it. But how do we make it accessible to everybody? How do if I have some student in my class who has a very different learning style from what I do, how do I reach them? I remember I was teaching I think it was a CS2 course, and I had a couple of students that were very clearly, they were visual learners. And I was struggling. How do I get this across? And I used a carpool. And I remember I was carpooling one morning. I had this brilliant idea. I thought about those. It's a toy for babies, actually. And there are these beads that kind of pop together. If you know what I'm talking about, you can make big necklaces and things about it. And I suddenly thought of that on a ride. And I said to the guy that I was riding with, I said, "We got to go to Toys R Us." And he kind of looks away. I bought one of these things. And then I used it in the class because I was doing linked lists at the time. And I was saying, here are the nodes, and then, here's how you pop them together. And for those students, it really connected to them. And that's kind of a micro example, but I think we really need to think about how do we do that on a broader scale. Now, there's been a ton of work on that, and I've been involved in a lot of that work. Being at the NSF, I've helped fund some of that work too. So we've made progress, and I told Dan I was going to do this. I think we're starting to let people see the beauty and the joy in computing, but I don't think we're quite there yet. And I think we shouldn't stop. We need to keep looking, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that we keep talking about CS1, because I don't think we have 100% right yet.
Right.
And as I said at the beginning, the landscape has totally changed. We're dealing with students now who have grown up with computers. They've never experienced not having internet. They've never, except when Verizon goes down on the East Coast or something like that. But
Amazon goes down.
Amazon
AWS is down. Where's Netflix?
Yeah. So anyway, that's how I think I'd answer that question.
Yeah, the question that he just went right into perfectly, that was a great transition, was on the structural barriers that we still see in computing, and how to overcome them. And certainly that has been a core part of your work, just from an accessible perspective. I mean, where do you see things now and the next big challenge?
Well, I think Paul pointed out, making our courses more accessible to more people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the teaching part, but it's the whole, all the way down to K through 12. How do we get K through 12 students engaged in computing
Mm-hmm.
from all different backgrounds? And, we still have this gender issue that I think, I don't know, PhDs in computing, women in PhDs in computing is still about 30%.
Mm-hmm. And
it's not at parity. It has grown, but it's going to take about 50 years to get to parity at the rate we're going. So, and then of course there's all the other minoritized groups as well. And I think it's under this DEI cloud at the moment, this dark cloud, DEI dark cloud. But when you think about it, 70% of our PhDs in computing are foreign nationals. So only 30% are US. So it is really kind of, well, we really want to have more US people with computing degrees. And NSF has funded projects like the CS Grad for US program, but that's been canceled because it had the word diversity in it. So so this dark cloud has to go away. And we have to get back to, let's probably have a different word for it than DEI in the future, but we want to educate as many people as we can, and computing is so important.
Yes.
And there's so many aspects now. Like you said, it's become a service thing. And we've done service courses from the 1970s for other people. Mm-hmm. And so I think it always has actually been a service course.
I just want to chime in on,
please.
I mentioned this to Richard yesterday. He said he was going to mention women. I'm teaching a course that's doing a history of computing. And one of the things that amazes me is you pick every one of kind of I'm going to say the male people that they always talk about in history. Babbage is usually one. Howard Aiken is another. Mauchly and Eckert are another. But if you look at each and every one of them, there was always a woman right next to them. Ada, right? Grace Murray Hopper, and then the what do they call them? The riveting Rosies or whatever. The women who were actually programming the ENIAC, the machines that Eckert and Mauchly were putting together. But the real thing I wanted to say is I think in terms of moving this forward, I think we as a discipline have an advantage, because I think we can. I agree completely with, addressing diversity issues and all the rest of that. But I mean, there's another underlying theme that I think we can argue successfully that people will support. It's absolutely required for our workforce. If we do not increase, and everybody in here knows this, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but if we don't increase the number, just what Richard said, if we don't increase the number of computing PhDs, computer graduates, this country is doomed. And I think that's the argument that we should use to say, we need to figure out ways to reach out to more people, regardless of who they are, so that we can increase the workforce on the other end.
And I'll, if you don't mind me tacking on, just making sure that we're also teaching computing concepts and understanding to people who aren't going to go into computing, because broadly having a foundational understanding of computing is just it is something that people need right now. I'm gonna ask for a little audience participation for just a moment. If you consider yourself early career, so a student, assistant professor, will you just put your hand up for a second? We can see the folks that are on their way. So we've got a good number of hands out there. And, folks, whether you are on the research track, the teaching track, or you're going to go into a lecturer sort of position, I think that, particularly in our general field of academia, we get so focused on success being the number of grants, the number of papers, the number of students. Speaking to these up and comers in our midst, if you had to explain what success looks like to you or feels like to you beyond those things, like what are the things that you've treasured?
Okay,
go ahead.
Yeah, I'll get back at you the next one, so I'm not worried about it. So I was going to do a little audience participation on my own, but I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands. But I want you to just.
Why not? I just did it.
I know you did. But I want everybody to do a thought experiment.
Okay.
And I want you in your own mind to answer that question that Mark just asked.
Okay.
What is success? What do you consider success in an academic context? And I was worried about, see, I can't even do it. I need to be quiet, but there's a clock here, so I'm going to wait. Okay. I'm going to guess this is something that ties us all together.
Okay.
And I'm going to bet that at least 90 to 95% of every single one of you came up with the exact same answer. It's our students. Okay. And if you want to raise your hands, it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, that was me.
But as I look back on everything that I've done, the text, I had no idea you were going to do this with the textbook, which was nice.
Thank you.
And I'm proud of that textbook that I wrote. It's not in publication anymore, but that's fine. I really enjoyed the work I did at the NSF. I enjoyed everything I did for the SIGCSE community. But I'll tell you what gives me the most pleasure. So when I hear from a student, I had a student several years ago, she wrote to me and said, she just got promoted to like a senior vice president position at some major tech company. And I don't remember all the details, but she said, I just want you to know that I'm here because of you. And it turned out she was ready to quit. And I said to her, this is stupid. When she was in school, I said, this is silly. I said, you've got what it takes, stick with it. And she said, that's what made me stay. And of all the things that I've done, it's those stories that mean the most to me. So for me, success is, all the things that Mark mentioned and was mentioned in the bio and the award and everything else. But to me, it's really the students. And the other thing I was going to share is a conversation I had with my brother a long time ago. We used to do this thing where we would go to Vegas. We decided we didn't really see each other enough, and we wanted to connect. And so we decided once a year we're going to go away, just the two of us, and do something. And we were trying to decide where. We picked Vegas. And so as you can imagine, we called it the Tymann Brothers Week of Debauchery. And usually the first night was, we woke up the next morning and it was like, oh my God, we're not going to do that again. But during one of these, we were having a conversation. I was probably at this particular point in time, I was trying to remember exactly where, but I certainly wasn't a full professor. I think I was still teaching at SUNY Oswego. He, on the other hand, was a paid consultant for Deloitte and Touche. And he was basically an expert in retail sales. And they would fly him all over the country, and he would help stores set things up. And he was making a lot of money. And I was thinking, he is super successful. He had this beautiful loft in Emeryville across from Pixar. And I thought, my God, he's so successful. And I thought about me, I'm struggling. I'm barely making enough money to pay my school loans off. And I'm thinking, why am I not successful? What I didn't know is at the same time when we're kind of having this conversation, he was kind of at a difficult point in his life because he was thinking, I'm not really getting any value out of this job. And he turned to me and he said, what do you mean you're not successful? And I said, what are you talking about? He said, what do? I help people earn money. He said, you change lives.
Wow.
And that is when I realized, what the real value of what it is that we do.
I don't have anything to add.
See, that's what happens when you let me go first.
Well, I'm glad you went first because, I feel the very same way that the success of our students is kind of the most rewarding part of our job.
Yeah. Well, we are coming down to it. I want to make sure we have 15 to 20 minutes for your questions. So just as a heads up, I think we've got one or two more questions to go, and I'll give you another heads up. So if you're starting to think of something you'd like to ask these gentlemen, please start thinking about it. Speaking specifically to our community here, we change the theme of the SIGCSE Technical Symposium every year. And every year we're trying to think about, what is the next thing? What is the next thing we need to be thinking about? What would you think that you would like the SIGCSE community to be really, really proud of, but we're not going to get there unless we take some intentional action right now?
Well, I think this right now is okay, but that would be a starting point. But
Mhm.
we've already been doing it. I mean, I think the SIGCSE community has been a leader in trying to bring in more people into computing from different minoritized groups.
Mhm.
And, a lot of people I met, don't think that much about disability and bringing that group in, but they learn from us. And I noticed at the conference here, there were like 2 full research sessions on accessibility, and almost all of them were about inclusion and bringing people with disability into our field. So I think, this is a little minor story, but there's a little kid I met, I don't know, 10 years ago, Boone. He's totally blind, and he was already using a computer. He was like 10, a little iPad, because the iPad is incredibly accessible. And you might not know that. So he had it connected to a Braille device, but it paired automatically, like through Bluetooth, and everything's set up so beautifully. And so I have a lot of respect for what Apple has done with accessibility, but very few people know about that. If you have an iPad, go and look at the accessibility thing and see there's like 25 different accessibility affordances that you could use, including eye gaze, including screen reader, switch control, voice control. I love the voice control, by the way. I've tried it myself, and it's so elegant. And so I feel like more people should know about that. I'm so proud of this community that they bought into it, and they're, that there's a subgroup of you out there that are really active in inclusion for people with disabilities. And so, you should all give yourself an applause for that. And by the way, it was Stefik and I had a session at SIGCSE. It was just a talk at SIGCSE, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago. And we were shocked that 60 people showed up to our talk. But it was the only talk at SIGCSE about disability. And now there are like 10. And
a BOF.
And there's a BOF, and there was a pre-conference event and so on. So, this is, keep that up and work on all the groups that we need to include into. So I'm looking at that dark cloud up there, and it's going to go away. It has, if you like, the silver lining. So keep at it, is what I say.
That's great. Thank you. Paul?
I don't have much to add.
Yeah.
That's good. This community has done a lot. I think about all the work with making computing, it changing the way that we teach introductory programming. And I say keep it up. We have to keep it up. And I also think that we need to be open to new ideas, and I think we need to be more aware of and think about the new generation that's coming through, and the experiences that they've been having. And I think we need to take that into consideration. But I think we're doing that. And, and I think if in 10 years, I don't know if this will ever happen, but there's kind of like a standard way to teach, introduce people to computer science, just like there's kind of a standard way to introduce calculus and math. And if this community was a big part of that, which I think it would be, I think that would be something to be proud of.
That absolutely would.
I'm going to add one thing.
Yeah, please.
We haven't talked about generative AI, it's again, I call that another dark cloud up there. But and I think people are worried that that's going to change our field completely, and it is going to change. Any new thing that came along, when I started in computing, there were no computers, very few, and that changed. And the PC came, and then, there were all these changes. So this is another change. So just work on it and try to make sure it's used in the right way in education, and it's not used in the wrong way. And I don't know what's right and wrong yet myself, even. So I think it's up to you guys to sort of charge ahead and figure out how generative AI can be used in education for good.
Yeah. I'm going to cede this question to the audience. Maybe someone wants to ask about Gen AI and accessibility. Wink. All right. I want to let Philip get a word in here, but while I'm delivering Philip's answer, we are going to start transitioning over to audience questions. So again, there's a mic over here in the house left. There's a mic over here, house right. Looks like we have someone getting ready over here, house right. We'll get to you in just one second, but let me make sure Philip gets some word in too. He wanted to chime in. What would it mean to teach CS as an art form? By that, I don't just mean we're working to use programming to make graphical or multimedia artifacts, but truly studying CS as an artistic medium of the sort that is taught in art schools and by practicing artists. I don't have an easy answer here, and I don't think any of us in here do, but that is certainly something that he would like to see our community be thinking about and moving forward on. So my sincere thanks to Philip and congratulations to him and for sending these awards along. Gentlemen, it has been an absolute honor to be able to start this conversation, but now I want to make sure that our friends, our other SIGCSE friends, have an opportunity. So please, when you introduce yourself, please give your name, give your institution, your pronouns if you so desire, and launch away. So over here, house right.
Hi, Tracy Camp from the Computing Research Association. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of CRA. My pronouns are she, her. So CRA runs the CS Grad for US program that Richard mentioned on stage. There have been, as we as a community know, a lot of federal awards that have been canceled over the past year, and it's a true travesty of that happening. I wanted to do two things. First of all, I want to just give a shout out to the National Science Foundation, because the people who are still there and the people who have left recently have worked their tails off for our community. Just worked, yeah. Thank you. We owe NSF staffers a huge debt of gratitude. They have tried to change the scope of many awards. They have tried to keep as many awards going. So anyways, just to give a shout out to NSF. And then I wanted to mention CS Grad for US is ending. We have our last cohort this year, but it's not actually due to the BPC thing. There's other reasons there, and Richard, you and I can talk about that offline. And then for my question actually is a little bit along the lines that you had suggested, is just what do you two think the community should do today to help our students to be productive citizens, say 5 years? What are your thoughts about that?
I'll let you go first.
Paul goes first.
Well, you know, Tracy, it was very close to one of Mark's questions, so hopefully you're not going to do that. But
I'm not going to answer him, but
yeah.
I'm done.
I'm gonna reframe your question a little bit. Where'd you go? Anyway, I'm gonna reframe your question. I cannot. This light is. I should have worn sunglasses. Yeah.
So this way, I think she's sat down.
I want to reframe it a little bit. I think we should think a little bit broader in terms of what can we do for society. And the reason I want to do this is one of Mark's questions made me think about this. Is the AI is coming. We knew AI was going to be a question, you know, in this panel here. And I agree, you know, everything that Richard said a few minutes ago, I think applies. I think about AI like anything else, it's a tool, and tools have purposes. I'm a big do-it-yourselfer at home, and I know, for example, if I want to put a small nail in the wall to hang up a picture, I don't use a sledgehammer, right? Because I'm probably going to put the sledgehammer through the wall, and then I got to deal with sheetrock, and it's a mess. I'm going to use a smaller hammer, right? So I think one of the things we need to do is view AI as a tool. I think we also need to think about what it can do, what it can't do. And a lot of us in this room know that, but the problem is society in general doesn't know that. And if you think back, if you think right now, we're in a quandary, it's a mess with social media. And a lot of people in this room saw this mess coming, but we were quiet, right? We didn't really say anything, and I think we should have. And I think what we should be doing is I think we should be educating, and again, our students for sure, but I really think because CS is becoming more of a service, this needs to be broader. We need to help people to understand the limitations of AI, and they need to understand it's not going to be a panacea. It's not going to solve all the problems, but it's going to be another tool in our toolbox. And I think that's something important that we should be doing right now. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. But on the other hand, it is being used in ways that are problematic already. And so you have to be prepared for that and figure out ways to remove those problems. Can be used to write programs. It can be used to do, lots of other things. The one thing I have a little bit of fear of is that a lot of these AI agents that are out there are acting like they're human. They sound like they're human and so on. And I think that is dangerous for little children, for example, and maybe some adults as well, because they somehow think it's a human and it's not. So I would say support the companies that treat generative AI as non-human and make sure that they do that. And I have to give a shout out to Gemini as doing better than ChatGPT in this regard by a long shot. So keep in mind that, and you don't want to ignore the dangers and just think of it as a tool.
Yeah.
You have to look at the actual dangers that are already happening and face them and try to figure out how to make those bad things not happen.
Yeah. We'll go over here to House Left.
Hi, I'm Judith Galezer from the Open University of Israel, Professor Emeritus of the Open University of Israel. I'm not going to mention AI. We keep asking the same questions for years to recruit more students, more women, more minorities. Maybe we have to think out of the box. Maybe we should let go the system of degrees as they are now and think something new, something more speaking to young people, like produce chunks of content, theoretical computer science, then a chunk of theoretical computer science or any other disciplines of computing. A chunk of implementation, which goes with the first one, and a chunk of industry and maybe social stuff. So, and each student can take what he, she thinks speaks to him or her. And then this will do good also for the student. He, she will know what they want to learn, what they need, what they want to know for their career. What do you think of it?
So breaking down the barriers of degree programs, the arbitrary nature of that, and breaking into, so looking at, you've looked at plenty of NSF proposals around curricula or things like that. Do you have?
I'll tell you, I actually, going over questions, maybe I couldn't agree with you more. I absolutely. And the person who kind of drove it home to me was Amy yesterday. Again, what I'm doing this semester, someone said I'm in preferment, I think, because you do what you prefer to do as opposed to what you have. So I'm teaching
that sounds great.
A course, and it's a history course. And one of the things that I feel strongly about, and it's a theme in the course, is that we reward our students for producing technology. If the technology is cool, if it's fast, whatever, we like it. But we don't really spend a lot of time thinking about the consequences, the intended and the unintended consequences of what the things we build. And I always point at Facebook, I think, is a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
Amy made me realize yesterday when she started to talk about the same issues that you were, that I think it's not just technology. If you take a look at any discipline, those disciplines produce some sort of a deliverable. And I think one of the deliverables that we produce as academics is curriculum. And I think one of the things that we really need to do, and that gets exactly to what you were talking about, I think we need to look at the unintended consequences of the curriculum that we put together and think about, you know, if some of these unintended consequences are not optimal, how do we make them optimal? So I think we should be open to that.
Yeah,
Anything to add?
yeah, a little bit. So one thing that we've been pushing for the last 10 years or so is teaching accessibility. And it actually, you know, that we're teaching how to make accessible artifacts in computing. And there's actually a special session today about our new book. And Amy is one of the co-editors of the book on teaching accessible computing and kind of bringing in kind of a theme into your class that's not just technical, you know, that it's something for good, whatever class you're teaching. It could be accessibility, it could be something else, but make the class more engaging in ways that are not just technical. And I think you were kind of saying that a little bit. And so it does, you know, I haven't seen any books that have done that. Certainly no CS1 books have done that. They don't mention accessibility at all. So think about how you can incorporate issues, and not in a separate course, but in your course, whatever you're teaching. It could be a theory course, it could be a computer graphics course. And if you come to our special session today, we'll cover quite a few topics like I think computer vision, how could you do it in the computer vision course, and so on. So I think that's one way to do it. And I have to give a shout out to Paula Gabbard, who created a CS0 class for like non-majors, where all the topics had an accessibility tinge to it, you know, and it's kind of cool. And one of the chapters in the book is about that class that she. So there is ways to make your classes more engaging for more people and not just be technical.
Yeah, great. Over to House Right.
Good morning. Thanks. This is Manuel Perez Quiñones from UNC Charlotte. I wanted to congratulate you both for their awards, but I wanted to tell a short story about Paul and then ask Richard. Richard to tell a short story about himself. Paul was treasurer for the SIGCSE conference on and off. I think they rotate every 2 years. And the year I ran it in 2019, the budget was pretty tight and we were worried. I was going to be in Minnesota. People thought, oh, it's going to be a lot of snow and they won't come.
It did.
So it did. We reached out and I said, without him looking at the budget, so budget is tight. And he hadn't, I mean, it's a massive spreadsheet. And without looking at it, he said, cut the muffins at the breaks in half. I was like, what? And sure enough, cutting the muffins are ridiculously expensive. Who would know? A treasurer, I guess. It brought the budget to the point where it's like, we can live with that difference. And we ended up making money. So thank you for that fantastic wisdom on budgetary matters.
Algorithm has saved the SIGCSE community.
Yeah. You know what? I didn't say cut the drink tickets.
No, not at all. No, and I appreciate that. No. By the way, if you were at that conference and you missed the muffin, it's his fault. Richard, I would like you to tell a story. Representation is important. You've done a lot of work for the disability community, but you're in the closet about being a Hispanic. Can you please tell us a story?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah, I do have Hispanic heritage, but I would say, you know, my grandmother who died before I was born, long before I was born, was Mexican and married my grandfather, who was an American, German American. And they had my father, who was an only child. And basically after his mother died, he was maybe 7 or 8 years old. He was raised by his Hispanic or grandparents in San Jose, California. So, but when I grew up, that was not, we didn't even talk about that. So I was in the deaf community, you know, that was my home. And so I never felt part of the Hispanic community, but I appreciate that you want to pull me in. And, you know, I'm not trying to hide that heritage. It's just, it's not It was not part of my upbringing.
Well, I also, the Hispanics in Computing group is a very welcoming bunch. So we'll go over here to house left.
Hi, I'm Sam Rebelski from Cornell College. I use he, him pronouns. I'm wearing, I think, a red and blue checkered shirt. Thank you both, or all three of you, or all four of you, for all you do for our community and beyond. I want to challenge Philip's comment about the intro course. While the topic may be the same, most of us teach the course very differently than when he was a student. If people have been listening to our community, if they teach large lecture classes, they're doing peer instruction. If people are listening to Manuel, who's now disappeared, they're using mastery grading. When I took the class, it was normal for people to use American football metaphors in talking about things, and we've learned that's not inclusive. So I would say we have grown a lot in how we teach it, if not necessarily what we teach. But there's a problem, which is that there are large numbers of people who teach computer science who have no idea about SIGCSE. And occasionally they come here and they say strange things like, yeah, I never let my students talk to each other. And things have gotten better in part because we have such a wonderful group of teaching track faculty, which we didn't have 20 years ago. But how do we get the good ideas from SIGCSE on how you teach well to the vast majority of CS educators who do not come to SIGCSE or who may not even know about SIGCSE?
So
Wasn't that a
I
fun
apologize to the remaining folks in line. This is gonna have to be our final answer. So make sure to catch these gentlemen afterwards. But how do we take what we do here and get it out to the masses? Maybe we'll have another question.
I was nervous when I saw Sam. I didn't know if it was going to be another muffin story or something, but
I have an idea. Okay.
Please.
So one thing, at least at University of Washington, we have years ago, we had one teaching faculty member for many years, maybe, and then two for many years. And now we have 20 teaching faculty. And they have a title. It's not lecturer, it's teaching faculty or faculty of practice or something like that. It could be whatever.
I'm just professor, which is nice.
I know, they could be just professor, but their role is primarily teaching. So there's some positive and negative about that. So those of us who are not in that role, we have this research thing, and now it's become even bigger, because, we don't have to teach those elementary courses. I taught intro programming. I taught Fortran when I started out. So I was doing all these courses. But they're not having that experience at all. And so they're teaching some advanced course, maybe only graduate courses. So it's going to be hard to reach them, but at least at a big school like University of Washington, there could be some interchange between the teaching faculty and the research faculty. We call it the research faculty, so that research faculty can get better at what they do teach. And I hope that does happen. I don't think it's happened yet. Maybe it has. Brett, I see you down there. Maybe you have some ideas.
I don't I was trying to think about how to answer a question, and I think it's along the same lines. I don't think we advertise very well. We don't self-promote. And, when you go back to your departments, I mean, hopefully it's true. I would look forward to SIGCSE every year because I would see all like-minded people. I'd see good friends. We'd have good conversations. And I would come back energized and excited. And I would share that. And I think we need to do more of that to get more people here. I was very pleased to see, I don't know how many of them are here. I saw at least one, but I think there's at least 4 people here from RIT, which is really great. It makes me think that people are talking about it. And that's what I think we need to do. I think we need to talk to our colleagues, tell them how exciting this is, how welcoming the group is, the great ideas that you get, the nifty assignments, and all these other sorts of all this great stuff that you pick up that I think applies all over the place. I mean, we do spend a lot of time talking about the intro courses and the rest of it, but there's a lot of people here who are experts in a wide variety of things. And in the birds of the feather, you see those. So I think the way we do it is we've got to get more of our colleagues to come here somehow.
I routinely tell folks that this community, this academic community, is the warmest, most open community that I have experienced coming from a software engineer. I feel like I'm dissing the software engineering community right now. And I'm so glad that you all got up this morning so we could come together to congratulate these two gentlemen on their service and their accomplishments with our community. Can we have another round of applause for our award winners? I'm sorry we didn't have time for all of your questions. Hopefully that you will have an opportunity to catch them in the hallway track as you're getting coffee or as you're going down to the session. Let me absolutely invite Tim back up on stage to give you some final instructions.
All right. Thank you all again for a great panel. And again, we are so grateful for our award winners to choose the technical symposium to receive their awards. So the exhibit hall is open. We should be having coffee and snacks available very shortly. So please go down and visit with our exhibitors and visit their booths and have a great second day of the technical symposium. Thank you.